So, Lone Rider here, and this is a red letter day for justice in America. From what I heard, and I actually came across this on one of the Spyderco forums, an extra-legal ban that was essentially created by the government amongst itself in an end run around the electoral process and in a way that dodged all the protections of the legislative process, has been lifted. And in particular talking about the ban on gravity knives in New York. This is something that should be celebrated by everybody, whether you carry a pocket knife or not. Now, exactly what happened was, this is word for word what I was told. Quote, after 9 years of effort, 8 years of costly federal litigation, 3 bills passed, and a terrifying threat of losing big at the Supreme Court, the New York Governor Cuomo signed A5944, repealing the state's ban on gravity knives while leaving the definition intact. By repealing these bans and making gravity knives legal, the New York City and District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. can no longer abuse the definition of a gravity knife and continue to arrest and prosecute people by claiming that a common lock blade folding knife or utility knife is an illegal gravity knife. The repeal was effective immediately, unquote. Wow, that's pretty good, right? This kind of took me by surprise. Governments are not known for admitting that they were wrong, and they are not known for undoing mistakes. Now, there's something else. Apparently, there's a court case pending about New York's gun regulations. In particular, there's apparently some absurd law in New York that you can't take your gun anywhere except to a firing range and back to your house. So, like, if you wanted to move, you wouldn't even be legally allowed to take it out of the city. It's been suggested that they're kind of slowly looking at their laws and, well, you know, we're afraid we're going to lose on this one and this one and this one, so let's change it before it actually gets struck down, setting some kind of precedent. That's as may be. But the point is that for whatever the reason, and I doubt, of course, it was that they're willing to admit they were wrong, but, whatever the reason, they've undone a bad policy, they've repealed a ban, they've decided to stop abusing people in this manner. And I think that's wonderful. I think when you no longer have to say, hey, but I told the police officer I wasn't breaking the law, and he said, I know, that's why I'm arresting you. It's a good day, right? It's a good day. Now, this is also something that's near and dear to me because I spent 3 years working for Mountain Bike Access here in Union County, New Jersey. And one of the things that I often told people was that it wasn't really about mountain bike access. It was about the government's policy and how it was arrived at. It just happened that that policy was one that banned mountain biking. And the reason is they didn't just get together and pass a law or pass an ordinance banning mountain biking. That would have been the proper, above board, and normal way to conduct government. Instead, what they did is they got together in a back room and tried to pretend that a law passed over 10 years before that meant something else was about banning mountain biking. So they essentially created the ban out of whole cloth. And by doing so, it really raised the question, why have a legislative process or an electoral process or lawmakers at all? In fact, why have laws, right? Why not just give these people officially the power to do what they're already doing, which is get together in small cliques behind closed doors and just do whatever the hell they want? That's not how you should run the government in a constitutional republic. And the point I was making, essentially, is that this is bigger than mountain biking. This is about the methodology of government. And that's a concern that is relevant beyond just the issue of mountain biking. And when I first heard how they were changing the definition of what a gravity knife is to basically say any knife where you can flick the blade open. So a regular lockback pocket knife, like this Spyderco, Little Native, for example, which is hardly, of intimidating blade length. The blade's like 2 inches long. I guess this could be considered a gravity knife if the pivot was loose, because what they were doing, a gravity knife is a knife that telescopes into the handle, and you press a switch, and it drops out. Supposedly, the law was originally passed because there was a fear that gangs would be using surplus, full-size folding paratrooper knives, German paratrooper knives from the Second World War during, let's say, the 1950s. And, those had like long blades. I mean, they were like full-size combat knives that just telescoped into the handle to make them easier to carry. And those were gravity knives, legitimately. But they were also, I mean, they were knives intended for combat use by paratroopers. This isn't. Neither is a Buck 110. Neither is a, little folding lockback, whatever, some other small pocket knife. And the fact that the government was basically saying, well, if the knife's loose enough that we can somehow contrive to show that you can flick it open, then it's a gravity knife. Well, I guess so. Any knife that just happens to be old and have a loose pivot would actually, its legal definition would change because of wear and tear. I mean, this is kind of a stupid, silly thing. And it was stupid and silly when I first heard of it. It's been stupid and silly in the intervening years. And there have been people who were arrested, who literally weren't committing a crime. Just somebody, policeman or whatever, saw, oh, hey, look, that guy's got a pocket knife. They asked to see it. They contrived to find a way to flick it open. And then they said, aha, it's a gravity knife. You're arrested. And, yeah, this was, like I said, stupid, foolish, unjust government policy when it was originally conceived. The idea of you pass a law, which all the protections of our governmental system are there, right? The law is only made and signed into law by people who are properly elected to office. Those are people, are answerable. They're answerable to the voters because they're elected. So you have some oversight in that sense. Their electoral sessions are, reported on. They're transcribed. In some cases, they're, you can watch them on C-SPAN. I mean, even when we were working on Mountebank access and we were going to these freeholder meetings, they had a stenographer there and they had somebody videotaping the meetings. And most of them you could get on, you could watch them on the internet, go to the county's website, and they had links. What happens in the above board part of government, in the legislative process, at the public meetings, that's something we can all see and in some way there's inbuilt protections that we have against it being abused, because we know who's doing it. Only certain people are allowed to do it, and there are people who are ultimately answerable to the citizens who their laws they enact are going to be affecting. But all of that is for naught. You can have the fairest elections. You can have the most, people with the most integrity elected to office. You can have, those people proceeding in good faith and acting with the best interest of the individual rights of the citizen. But if the law they, in the process, craft gets abused by somebody else after it's already enacted, and somebody just decides retroactively, hey, now that this law's been made, let's just pretend it means something else. Well, then all of those protections that you have mean nothing. Right? This is why the thing with Mountebank access, aside from the fact that I'm a cyclist and I wanted Mountebank access, and I believe there are benefits to Mountebank access and getting more people outdoors and enjoying nature and all of that, yes, it was beyond mountain bike access. It was the issue of also how the government arrived at the ban on mountain biking that was denying us access. If all they had done was pass a law or an ordinance, then it would be very simple. We just argue for repealing the law or ordinance. And then it's just a question of, can we make the case and convince people that it should be changed? But because this was something that, no law or ordinance was ever enacted by the government's own admission, an Open Public Record Act request I filed, they basically just got together behind a back door, stuck their hands in the air, and said, by the power of Grayskull, this is what the policy is. You can't do it because we say so. Is there a law? No. Laws? Who needs laws? Well, we do need laws. Otherwise, we don't have government anymore. All we have is a big gang of people who are doing what they can because, well, they can, and nobody's holding them accountable. And so whenever a policy that's made in this way, extra legally, behind closed doors, without any oversight, without any legislative authority, or by perverting legislative authority that was intended to authorize something else entirely. In other words, when you have the government expand after the fact the scope, meaning, or penalty of legislation in such a way that it's an end run around the electoral process, and it's a dodge, essentially, a con job to try and trick people out of their constitutional protections and out of the protections inherent in the system of representative government that we take for granted here in this country. Anytime a policy arrived in that manner is undone and the damage is no longer being inflicted going forward because they've stopped, That's something to celebrate. That's something to say, hey, the good guys won, okay? Now, obviously, there are some people who shouldn't be carrying knives. I mean, I think most people should have a small pocket knife on them. You know, you never know when you're going to need it. It's certainly something that's useful. But obviously, you know, there are people, for example, who are, you know, dangerous or criminals. We know what they're going to do with a knife. It's not the same thing that you or I are going to do with a knife. However, is giving the government the power to pervert the meaning and scope of legislation after the fact in order to arrest innocent people who literally aren't breaking the law, is that how you deal with that concern? Right? Yeah, I mean, you might as well say, well, there's people who shouldn't have a lot of things, right? There's people who shouldn't have a driver's license. Is arresting people who haven't broken the traffic laws the way to deal with those people? There are people who shouldn't have guns, but is taking away everybody's gun gonna, you know, is that the way to deal with that? Or is there maybe a way to address that concern that doesn't involve throwing millions of innocent people and their constitutional rights under the bus? Yeah. Same thing here. Whether you think people should be allowed to carry knives or not is almost irrelevant. The point is that the way the policy was arrived at was an end run around the electoral process. It was an abuse of power. It was an act that illustrated flagrant contempt for the voters, for the citizens affected by the rules, and you know, just for the type of country that this is supposed to be. So the fact that this may have, as indicated here, that this report, that this has been repealed, that they repealed the law that was being abused so that people no longer have the ability to abuse it and arrest people who weren't breaking the law because they weren't carrying a gravity knife, they were just carrying a regular knife. That's a good thing. The fact that the abuse was so ingrained that they couldn't just tell them to stop abusing the law, they actually had to repeal the law that was being abused, that says a lot, right? But it's not the citizens' fault if the government is so corrupt that in addition to ending the corruption, you have to also remove some legislation that has actually been corrupted. That's not our fault as the citizens. That's your fault, government, for abusing that. It's worth noting that, you know, they didn't just say stop abusing this law. They actually repealed the law, according to this report, indicating that the abuse was so ingrained that there was no way they were ever going to stop as long as they had the ability to sort of get away with doing it. You repeal the law or the ban that they're abusing to try and say it applies to things it doesn't, and then you've cut them off at the knees. They don't have they may still want to abuse that law, but it's not there for them to abuse. So, you know, I'm very glad that this happened. You know, it's always nice when a bad government policy is overturned. I may have failed on the mountain bike effort. We didn't get mountain bike access here in Union County. But it's nice to see people still trying to fight bad government policy on other issues and still trying to oppose things that, you know, the problem isn't just the effect of the policy in terms of it's not letting people do what they want to do or what they feel they need to do. For example, carry a tool like a pocket knife, or in the Union County case here in New Jersey, ride your mountain bike. These are things that people want to be able to do. So there would be an impetus to change the rule regardless of how it was arrived at. It's just that on top of the fact that people feel they're being unjustly infringed on by these rules, in these two particular cases, the mountain bike and the carrying of pocket knives in New York, not only are the rules interfering with decent people as they try to go about their business and live their lives, they're also rules that were improperly arrived at, that essentially were arrived at by a process outside the normal, legal, proper process of lawmaking in this country, right? I don't know any state where somebody can just get together with a bunch of his pals behind a closed door and say, it's against the law because we say it is. There always has to be a process you follow. And again, if after electing people and then they go through the legislative process and an executive, governor, president, whomever signs it into law, and it gets enacted into law, and then they start enforcing it, and then after the fact somebody decides to change what that law means, well, then all of those protections mean nothing, right? Why have laws at all? This is a particularly timely question, and particularly timely issue with these questions that it raises about, well, then why have laws at all? Why vote at all? Considering we have an election coming up next Tuesday, right? Why vote if we can elect whoever we want? They can pass whatever laws they want, but then somebody else can just come in after the fact and change the meaning of that legislation or what it applies to. Well, then what's the point? The answer is, then there isn't a point. In that case, we all lose, and a handful of people who want to just do whatever without any restraints on their power win. That is so not cool. Words fail me. So whenever a policy like that is undone, it's an awesome thing. Whenever people like that get their comeuppance and are forced to back off and stop hassling people and stop, literally, in the case of New York, throwing innocent people who literally have not broken the law in prison. It's a wonderful thing. It's a good day for justice. It's a good day for America. And it's a good day for people everywhere who are concerned about the conduct of their government. Hopefully, this this report is accurate. Like I said, I just heard this now, and oh gosh, I hope it's true, and I hope New York doesn't try to weasel out of it or find some other way to go back to doing the same thing, because here in the Northeast, especially where the rules and laws are, they range from really, really strict to just asinine to, holy cow, who's in charge? Like Stalin, right? We need all the help we can get up here in the Northeast in terms of paring back some of this governmental abuse and overreach. And it doesn't matter what the issue is, whether it's riding your bike in a public park, whether it's arresting people for Swiss Army knives that obviously aren't weapons and aren't illegal or whatever. The point is that when the government steps beyond its just and proper functions, goes outside the rule of law, when the government actually perverts existing laws and legislation in order to obtain a result that it couldn't get legislatively, and just basically do whatever it wants, including sending innocent people to prison for the crime of not breaking a law, then it's high time that ended. And I am so glad that this is not something that I would have expected to hear. It just totally made my day. This is so cool. This is so great for everybody who really cares about things being done fairly and things being done the right way, and who wants to live in a better world, not a world that's constantly growing worse and more constricted. And yes, I don't live in New York, but unfortunately, we also know that states that are in one area often take cues from other states in the area. So, if New York has a policy, there's always a danger that neighboring states, such as New Jersey here, may try to adopt a similar policy. So it's always great when a bad policy in a nearby state gets struck down. First of all, it's great anyway, just because an injustice has been halted and people have been stopped from doing something wrong. But when you live in a nearby state, it's even more great, because it's like a load's been taken off your shoulders. It's like, oh, thank goodness. I no longer have to worry about the government where I live looking at that nearby state and saying, hey, let's copy them. Right? So a great day for America, a great day for people in New York, and a great day for anybody who's concerned about the fairness and properness of their government. Lone Rider out.